You might assume that any property can work as a house hack as long as you rent out part of it, but that's categorically not true. In fact, there are some property types that can completely ruin your house hack, either by making it way more expensive, way more stressful, or just completely defeating the point of the strategy. And the crazy thing is that none of the experts that talk about house hacking online talk about this. Not Bigger Pockets, Brandon Turner, or Dave Ramsey. I've never seen anyone address this issue head on. So in this video, I'm going to blow up their spot. I'm going to tell you about the 3 types of properties I would never house hack and explain why you shouldn't either. And I already know one of these is going to be controversial because when most people think about house hacking, this is the first property type they picture. And by the way, my name is Vitaly Volpov. And just like you, I started my real estate investing journey with one house hack and used it as a springboard to build my confidence, gain experience, and ultimately grow my portfolio from a single duplex to almost 200 units today. So if you pay attention, by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which properties to avoid so you can find the right house hack that actually makes sense and sets you up for financial success. And stick around to the end because I'll also share a bonus tip about a very popular investing strategy that is now simply too risky to rely on when you're house hacking. Let's get into it. The first type of property I would never house hack is a rental property with 5 or more units. Now, on the surface, this might seem like a great idea. More units means more rental income, right? Well, the problem is that as soon as you go above 4 units, you lose every single advantage that makes house hacking such a powerful strategy. The biggest issue? Financing. When you buy a 1 to 4 unit property, you get access to residential loans. That means you can put as little as 3.5% down with an FHA loan, get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and secure a lower interest rate compared to commercial loans. You also don't need huge cash reserves, you won't have to submit quarterly financials to the bank, and you won't be stuck with a prepayment penalty if you want to sell or refinance early. But the moment you step into the world of 5 or more units, everything changes. Now you're dealing with commercial lending. That means you need at least 20% down, your loan term is typically no more than 25 years, and many loans come with balloon payments where you have to refinance or pay off the balance in 5 to 10 years. Interest rates are also at least 1% higher than residential loans, which means you're paying more to borrow the same amount of money. And the closing costs? Way higher. Commercial lenders also charge extra fees, require more documentation, and force you to go through a much stricter approval process. And it's not just the financing that's a problem. Property insurance gets more complicated too. A 5-unit plus property house hack isn't just a commercial building, it's also your personal residence. So now you need a policy that covers both commercial liability and your own belongings, and finding the right coverage can be tricky and expensive. And finally, there's the issue of property valuation. Now, this one may come off as a little technical if you're brand new to real estate, but stick with me for a minute and I'll explain. Unlike residential properties, which are mostly valued based on comparable sales, commercial properties are valued based on how much income they produce. So if you're living in one of the units and not renting it out, that lowers the total income of the building, which means it's worth less than it would be if all the units are rented out. Let me give you a real example of how living in a 5+ unit building as a house hacker can actually hurt its value. Let's say you buy an 8-unit property, and in this market, each unit rents for $1,000 per month. If all the units are rented out, that means the total gross rent for the building is $8,000 per month or $96,000 per year. You with me so far? Okay, now let's say after paying for all of your operating expenses, things like property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and vacancies, which let's say come to $40,000, you're left with $56,000 in net operating income, or NOI. And let's assume that properties in this market are valued using a 10% capitalization rate, or cap rate. That means to get the value of the property, you take the NOI and divide it by the cap rate. $56,000 divided by 10% gives you a property valuation of $560,000. But now let's say you decide to house hack it and live in one of the 8 units instead of renting it out. Now, instead of collecting rent from all 8 units, you're only collecting rent from 7 units. So your gross income drops from $96,000 per year to just $84,000 per year. Your operating expenses are still the same because whether you live there or not, you're still paying for property taxes, maintenance, utilities, and so on. So your NOI in this scenario drops from $56,000 down to just $44,000. And now when you divide that $44,000 NOI by the same 10% cap rate, the new valuation comes out to just $440,000. That means that simply by living in the building, you've lowered the property's value by $120,000. And here's the real problem. Commercial lenders don't care that the income is artificially low because you're occupying one of the units. They're not going to base their underwriting on what the property could be making. They're going to go by what the numbers actually show today. which means that if you need to sell or refinance this property, the commercial lender issuing the mortgage is going to value the property significantly lower. And that's why I would never house hack a 5-unit property. The financing is worse, the lending terms are stricter, and on top of all that, you're actually making the property less valuable just by living there. All right, if the first point didn't trigger too many people, this next one will. What is the property type that most people think of when they hear the term house hacking? Yeah, single-family homes. A lot of people assume that a single-family house is a great way to house hack. Just buy a house, rent out the extra bedrooms, and boom, you're house hacking. But for most people, this is a terrible idea. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about single-family homes with ADUs or in-law suites. I'm talking about the kind of single-family house hacking that is all over BiggerPockets. Guest after guest on their various house hacking podcast episodes talks about starting out by renting out rooms in their single-family houses. They even published a book on house hacking where the author explained that he started out with a single-family house hack. So what's the issue? Well, for one, privacy and personal space. When you house hack a single-family home, you're usually renting out bedrooms, which means you're sharing everything else with your tenants. The kitchen, the living room, the bathrooms, the parking, the storage space, everything. And most people, especially if they have a significant other, and definitely if they have kids, do not want to live with their tenants. It's one thing to be a landlord when your tenants live in a separate unit. It's a whole different ballgame when you're sharing your entire living space with them. It creates way more chances for conflict, noise, visitors, cleanliness, parking issues, you name it. But it gets even worse. Enforcing the lease when things go wrong becomes an absolute nightmare. Let's say you rent out a bedroom to a tenant, and at first everything seems fine. But then little things start happening. Maybe they start paying rent a few days late. Maybe they're leaving dirty dishes in the sink for days. Maybe they're letting their friends crash on the couch every weekend, turning your home into a revolving door. Now, technically, all of these things violate the lease, or at the very least, they violate the boundaries you thought were understood. But are you really going to confront them about it? You see this person every single day. You share the same kitchen, you pass them in the hallway, you hear them watching TV in the next room at night. So instead of dealing with the awkwardness of enforcing the lease, you let it slide. You tell yourself it's not that big of a deal. And maybe for a while it isn't, until it is. Because once a tenant realizes that the rules aren't really being enforced, things can spiral out of control very quickly. The late payments get later, the occasional guests turn into full-time unpaid roommates, the cleanliness issues get worse. And what happens if it escalates to the point where you need to take legal action? Let's say the tenant stops paying rent altogether. Now you're in a position where you have to formally evict someone who lives inside your house. That's not just uncomfortable, it's stressful and potentially dangerous. There's a reason most landlords don't live with their tenants. Once you serve an eviction notice, you've now got someone living under your roof who knows you're trying to force them out. That creates tension, animosity, and a real risk of retaliation. I'm not saying that every tenant is going to trash your place or get aggressive, but do you really want to put yourself in a situation where that's even a possibility? I wouldn't. This is why I say house hacking a single-family home isn't just bad financially, it's bad from a landlord and tenant relationship standpoint too. The power dynamic is completely different when you share a living space. It makes it harder to set and enforce boundaries, and it can put you in an uncomfortable or even unsafe situations. And that's just not the way I would want to house hack. Now, some people try to get around these issues by saying, well, just rent out the rooms on Airbnb instead of signing long-term leases. At first, that might sound like a reasonable solution. You get to charge higher nightly rates, and since the guests are only staying for a few days at a time, they don't get too comfortable, so maybe they won't push boundaries or cause long-term headaches like a traditional tenant might. But here's the reality. You're still sharing the space. The privacy issues don't go away with an Airbnb, and now you're not just a landlord, you're running a full-blown hospitality business. If you rent out individual rooms, you're still sharing your home with strangers, but now instead of dealing with one tenant for 6 months or a year, you've got a constant rotation of different people every few days. That means you never know who's going to be there next. It could be a quiet professional who's just in town for work, or it could be a college kid who treats your house like a weekend party pad. And even if every guest is perfectly respectful, you still have to manage the logistics. It's not as simple as throwing your listing up on Airbnb and collecting rent. You have to furnish the rooms, provide fresh linens, towels, and toiletries, and make sure the space is stocked with basic essentials. And after every guest leaves, the room has to be cleaned and sanitized and reset, which either means you're doing it yourself or you're paying someone else to do it for you. And that's not even getting into the wear and tear that comes with constant turnover. Every extra suitcase dragged through your hallway, every extra shower, every extra meal cooked in your kitchen, it all adds up. Your home starts aging faster, your maintenance costs go up, and before you know it, the extra money you thought you were making is getting eaten up by the increased expenses. Now, some people take a different approach and rent out the entire house on Airbnb instead of individual rooms. That way, they avoid the awkwardness of sharing space with guests. Usually, this is done during peak tourist seasons when renting the whole house for a few weeks could equal an entire year's worth of equivalent long-term rents. But here's the first problem with that. Where are you staying while your house is rented out? If you're staying with family or crashing at a friend's place for free, maybe this could work. But if you're renting another place or paying for a hotel, now you have a huge extra expense that cuts into your profit. And even though you're not sharing the space with the renters for those few weeks, you're still sharing your house with them. Strangers get to use your furniture, your appliances, your plumbing, and so on. Things can and will be broken, and things can and will go missing, and you'll have to deal with fixing and replacing them. And on top of it all, you're still running a hospitality business. You still have to handle cleaning, restocking, guest communications, and maintenance. If a guest clogs the toilet at 2 a.m., guess what? That's your problem. If the dishwasher breaks, you're either calling a repairman immediately or risking a bad review that tanks your listing in the future. The bottom line is Airbnb is not a solution to the single-family house hack problem. House hacking is supposed to make your life easier. A single-family house hack, in my opinion, whether rented long-term or short-term, does the opposite. This is why when I was starting out, I only looked at 2 to 4 unit rental properties for my house hacks, and I recommend you do the same. If you want to get more information on how to find and analyze the good potential house hacks, how to manage them effectively, and get real-time guidance from me, come and join me in my free House Hack Mastery community. The invite link is in the description below. It's completely free, no hidden fees or fine print. Come check it out and let's connect. Moving on to property type number 3. Believe it or not, this one is even worse than single-family house hacks because it has all the same downsides, plus 2 or 3 others on top. I'm of course talking about condos and townhomes as house hacks. At first glance, a condo or townhome might seem like a great house hack. They're often more affordable than single-family homes. They typically come with less maintenance responsibility, and in some cases, they even include built-in amenities like a pool or a gym or security services. But here's the catch. HOAs, space limitations, financial challenges, and rental restrictions make condos and townhomes some of the worst properties for house hacking. Let me explain. When you buy a condo or townhome, you're not just buying a property. You're buying into a homeowners association or an HOA. That means that the HOA has the power to make rules about how you use your own property, and you can't do very much about it. One of the main issues? Rental restrictions. Some HOAs completely ban renting altogether. Others limit how many units in the community can be rentals. And if that cap has already been met, well, you're out of luck. And even if you are technically allowed to rent your unit, some HOAs require your tenant to be board approved, which means if the HOA doesn't like your tenant, they can deny them the ability to live there. And then there are the rules about lease terms. A lot of HOAs require a minimum lease of 30 days, or 6 months, or even a full year, which means short-term rentals are completely off the table. In those cases, if you were planning to rent by the night or week through Airbnb, that strategy just got shut down before you even started. But rental restrictions aren't the only problem. HOA fees are a problem unto themselves. Monthly HOA dues can be hundreds of dollars per unit, and none of that money goes toward paying your mortgage. More importantly, these fees can also increase at any time, meaning your costs are never fully predictable. But even that's not all. There are also special assessments. If the HOA needs to fund a major repair like a new roof, updated plumbing, or fixing structural issues, they can hit every owner with an unexpected bill for thousands of dollars. And there's nothing you can do about it. Even worse, if the HOA mismanages funds, the entire complex can start falling apart. If that happens, property values decline, and suddenly your house hack isn't worth what you thought it was. The bottom line? You're not just buying a property, you're buying into a system where someone else controls way too much of your house hack success. And here's another thing to consider. If living with tenants in a single-family house hack is tough, it's even worse in a condo or a townhome. Why? because condos and townhomes are usually much smaller than detached single-family homes. Most condos and townhomes have fewer bedrooms and bathrooms, which makes it harder to rent out multiple spaces without things getting cramped. There's also little to no yard space, which can make the unit less attractive to tenants, especially those with pets or kids. And many condo and townhome communities have very limited parking, which means there may not be enough spaces for both you and your tenants. If your tenants have multiple vehicles or if they have frequent visitors, you could start running into serious conflicts. And if you're in a townhome or a condo, you have shared walls with neighbors. That means noise complaints are much more likely, not just from your tenants, but from your neighbors too. And HOAs often have rules about what you can and can't do inside your unit. If you wanted to make improvements, add soundproofing, or even just change the flooring, you might have to ask for permission first. At that point, is this even your property, or are you just renting from the HOA? So what about Airbnb as a strategy with condos and townhomes? Well, I pretty much already covered that with single-family homes, and there's no point of beating a dead horse. I'll just say that it fails with condos and townhomes for the same reasons as it fails with single-family house hacks. Except you also have the additional restrictions that an HOA might place on short-term rentals. With all of this said, even if you find a perfect condo or townhome for house hacking, getting financing can be a nightmare. It's like facing down the final boss in a video game. You've gotten through all the levels and beat the odds, only to face a brick wall that you can't punch through. Many lenders consider condos and townhomes riskier than traditional houses because of their shared ownership structures. If too many units in a complex are investor-owned, lenders may refuse to finance new loans, which means fewer options and higher costs for you. On top of that, FHA and VA loans aren't always available for condos and townhomes. For a condo complex to qualify for FHA financing, it has to be on the FHA's approved condo list, and many of them are not. That means you may be forced into a higher down payment loan instead of putting down just 3.5% or 5% like you would with a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. Some lenders even require 10 to 25% down on condos and townhomes, making the house hacking strategy far less affordable and viable. House hacking is supposed to give you flexibility and control, but if you house hack a condo or a townhome, you're giving up both. You lose rental flexibility because the HOA can restrict or ban rentals. You lose affordability because high HOA fees can increase your costs. You lose privacy because you have limited space and are sharing rooms with tenants. And you lose financing options because lenders are stricter with condos and townhomes. Again, that's why I stick to 2 to 4 unit properties, no HOA, better financing, and more control. Now, I've already spent quite a bit of time talking about the short-term rental strategy and how it's not a great strategy for house hacking single families, condos, and townhomes. But here's the bonus tip that I want to leave you with. I think that the short-term rental strategy is a bad strategy even for the 2 to 4 unit house hacks. Let me explain why. Short-term rentals have become so popular that cities across the country are cracking down hard on them. Some places are requiring strict permits and licenses, making it much harder to legally operate an Airbnb. Others have outright banned short-term rentals in certain neighborhoods or even entire cities. You might say, well, I'll just avoid buying properties in those areas. Problem solved, right? Well, not really. The regulations on short-term rentals are evolving and expanding rapidly. There's no such thing as a safe location anymore for short-term rentals. Municipalities that had previously allowed short-term rentals for years are suddenly changing their minds and voting in restrictions. So why is this happening? A few key reasons. First, affordable housing concerns. When short-term rentals exploded in popularity several years ago, investors started buying up properties that would have otherwise gone to owner-occupants or long-term tenants. This helped drive up home prices, making it even harder for regular home buyers to afford a place to live. Second, hotels saw their occupancy rates drop as more travelers opted for Airbnbs. But unlike hotels, most short-term rentals were not subject to the same taxes, regulations, and safety requirements. So the hotel industry pushed back hard. They lobbied and continue to lobby local governments to create stricter rules, and they're winning. And third, a lot of homeowners didn't appreciate having what felt like a mini hotel pop up next door. They got tired of constant noise, parking issues, and random strangers coming and going in what was supposed to be a residential neighborhood. And when enough homeowners complain, city officials listen. The result? Short-term rental laws are constantly changing, and they're almost never in favor of investors. What works today might be completely illegal next year. If your entire strategy is built around Airbnb, that is a serious problem. So even if you plan to rent out your 2, 3, or 4-unit house hack on Airbnb, you should run the numbers on it as a long-term rental first and see if it still makes sense for you. If the answer is no, then you're taking a huge risk. Because here's the bottom line, you don't control what your city will do in the future. The smartest investors buy properties that work as long-term rentals first. Anything extra from short-term rentals, that's just a bonus, not the entire strategy. House hacking is supposed to be about smart, sustainable investing. The whole point is to reduce or eliminate your housing costs in a way that's sustainable and predictable. Short-term rentals are the opposite of that. They are heavily regulated and getting harder to operate legally. They're less predictable and harder to count on long-term, and they are a risky bet if they're the only way a house hack makes financial sense. If you're house hacking, make sure your property works as a long-term rental first. Don't gamble on a short-term rental strategy that might not even exist in a few years. So those are the 3 types of properties I would never house hack, plus the one strategy that I think is way too risky. If you're just starting out and looking to take the first step toward buying your first house hack, I've put together a free ebook called the House Hack Success Checklist. It provides an overview of everything you need to have in place in order to find, finance, and close on your first house hack. Check it out, link in the description. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe for more real estate investing videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.